Here is our video on the Townshend Acts, Daughters of Liberty and Virtual Representation, written and presented by Alan and Nitish.
A common slogan thrown around during the building unrest and imminent revolution was "no taxation without representation." The colonists argued that since there was no direct American representation in the Parliament had no right to impose taxes on the colonists.
However, Prime Minister George Grenville, among other British, thought the American protests absurd, arguing that the members of Parliament represented every person in the British Empire regardless of whether they had voted. And besides, the Americans paid less taxes than the British anyway. The idea of virtual representation was scoffed at by many colonists.
Even so, the British continued to tax the colonists. One of such taxes were the Townshend Acts, proposed by Charles Townshend, which was composed of many smaller acts. The first was the Suspending Act, which suspended New York's assembly until it complied with the Quartering Act. The second imposed light indirect importing tax on glass, white lead, paper, paint, and most infamously tea.
These lighter taxes were still met with more non-importation agreements, but they were less effective than before, as the taxes were less serious and smuggling was accessible. The Third Act established bureaucracy in Boston to enforce taxation and regulation, while the Fourth Act lowered tea import taxes, quashing the Dutch smuggling. Each act further angered the colonists and spurred on more boycotting.
These boycotts were enforced by the Sons and Daughters of Liberty. The Daughters of Liberty specifically were a female group who played an active role in the boycott by refusing to buy British goods for their families, brewing Liberty tea to substitute for British tea, and producing homespun clothes instead of purchasing the British textiles.
As such, the mid-18th century saw an eternal struggle between the colonists and British over control and taxation that would finally culminate in revolution.